The second year after my death, Henry was about to get engaged to Becky, a prominent socialite in the business circle. At the banquet, he took a small sip of white wine and suddenly let out a cold laugh. Someone once said that I, Henry, could never make money, never rise above my station, never achieve fame and success. Now I've accomplished all of it. Where is she? Why won't she show up? Hearing these words, I was suddenly stunned. Oh, he still remembers what I used to say, but I'm already dead. The living shouldn't hold grudges against the dead. I hope he forgets me soon. Henry is now the wealthiest man in South City, and this engagement banquet has drawn a large crowd. Our former high school classmates and teachers have all arrived. The former class monitor walked over, respectfully toasting Henry and chatting about school days. He suddenly asked, "Boss Henry, who was that person you mentioned earlier?" Henry snorted and touched the watch on his right wrist. How strange. It was the graduation gift I gave him when we finished high school, $500, and he still hasn't thrown it away. It doesn't match his current status at all. The class monitor shook her head and sighed. It sounds like Jessica's tone, but Jessica has been dead for so long. How could she possibly appear? For a moment, the air fell silent. No one spoke. Then came a sharp crack. Henry's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. His entire face changed color. His mouth opened, and it took him a long while to finally ask, "What did you say? Who died?" At that moment, everyone's gaze turned in this direction. Henry, usually so composed and self-controlled, suddenly appeared flustered, making people wonder what could have happened. The class monitor hesitated before repeating, "Jessica, impossible." Henry immediately cut him off. "Didn't she say she went abroad to find her boyfriend?" "What boyfriend?" The class monitor was also stunned. "Jessica's family has a hereditary disease where women don't live past 30, Mr. Henry, you really didn't know." My ghost stood behind Henry, watching the chaotic scene, and couldn't help but sigh. 2 years ago, when I left Henry, that's exactly what I told him. I said I had a 6 feet 3 inches old flame abroad, with gold-rimmed glasses, a refined scoundrel, well-endowed and skilled, speaking in a charming London accent. It drove Henry absolutely mad. He stared at me intently. His eyes reddened as if they were about to bleed. "I don't believe it." He gripped my wrist tightly. "Jessica, I don't believe it. You're lying." "If I'm lying, I'm a dog." Without a shred of shame, I pulled out a photo from my pocket, me being held in the arms of a tall man, both of us laughing happily, a $50 photoshopped image I had someone online edit for me. But Henry didn't even look at it. He just snatched it away and tore it up. $50, you know, my heart ached. "Give me a reason." He threw the torn photo on the ground and stomped on it hard with his foot. "After all these years together, you're just going to dump me like this, or what?" I rolled my eyes. "You're broke. Your startup failed. Henry, I don't see any future with you. Do you expect us to live in a rented 70 square meter apartment for the rest of our lives when we're 30? Maybe I was being too harsh." His hand, which had been gripping my wrist, slowly loosened and dropped to his side. I knew Henry was too proud. This was his limit, and he would never beg me to stay by his side again. So I dragged my suitcase and left the apartment we had rented together. Just as I opened the door, Henry called out to me. "Jessica," he said, staring at me, enunciating each word deliberately, "you'll regret the decision you made today sooner or later." I smiled faintly. "All right, I'll be waiting for that day." They say death extinguishes a person like a lamp, but my soul still lingers. Inexplicably tethered to Henry, the Grim Reaper White told me it's because someone's obsession with me runs too deep, so I must remain in the mortal world a while longer, and so I watched as Henry gradually grew cold and ruthless, decisive in his actions. In just 2 years, his status achieved a triple jump, starting a business, going public, accumulating immense wealth. He was no longer the person who once stood outside an investor's door all night for $500,000, yet upon hearing of my death, he actually showed such a panicked expression. He took out his phone and began frantically calling my number, but I had already blocked all his contact methods long ago, making it impossible for the call to go through. Becky, who had been standing alone to the side, saw Henry like this and cautiously approached. She gently placed her hand on his shoulder and asked with a trembling voice, "Henry, are you okay? Who is this Jessica?" "Get away from me." Henry suddenly pushed Becky aside. When he chooses to be harsh, he can be quite merciless. "Our marriage is nothing but a business alliance. I'll help your Benson family, but you'd better stay out of my personal affairs." Becky's cheeks flushed red at his scolding. The other guests at the banquet exchanged glances as if they had stumbled upon some sensational gossip. but none dared to comment. The silent hall seemed to echo only with Henry's heavy breathing and the sound of him repeatedly making phone calls. Finally, he found the number of one of our old friends from the class monitor, my best friend, Freya. Poor Freya was probably asleep at this hour and took a while to answer the call. She asked groggily, "Who is it? Where's Jessica?" Henry said directly, "Are you out of your mind? Jessica's been dead for 2 years, and you're only looking for her now." Before she could finish speaking, Henry hung up the phone. He froze for a moment, then suddenly let out a few cold laughs before staggering away from the banquet. The driver had been waiting outside the hotel entrance the entire time. Upon seeing his boss, he immediately opened the car door for him. Sitting in the back seat, Henry hunched over, covering his face with his hands, and remained silent for a long time. He waited until they were almost at the villa before taking out his phone and sending a message to his assistant, "Investigate Jessica's matter for me." After returning to the villa, Henry went alone to the study. He sat alone in his executive chair. Many people called him, but he didn't answer. Eventually, he simply turned on silent mode. He looked just like he did back then, when the investors kicked him out of his home, sitting all alone by the roadside greenery with that pitiful expression. Back then, I would buy him a cup of hot milk tea and shove it into his hands. Now that he's so wealthy, why does he still wear that same miserable look? I really want to pat him on the shoulder and shout into his ear, "Henry, you've got to look forward, look forward." Henry sat like that, not sleeping all night. It wasn't until past 9 in the morning when the butler came knocking, followed by his assistant. The assistant placed a folder on the table and said softly, "Boss, the information about Miss Jessica you asked me to find is all here." The efficiency is truly impressive. Looks like the assistant didn't sleep all night either. I pouted, exploitative class, capitalist. Henry opened the folder and pulled out its contents. Not much, just 7 or 8 photos. Curious, I leaned in to look with him. Most of them are old photos from 2 years ago. Some are clearly screenshots from roadside surveillance cameras, while others are backgrounds in photos taken by passers-by. I clicked my tongue in amazement. This assistant is too wasted working for Henry. They should have been a detective instead. The place I visited most frequently in the photos was the hospital. The timestamp in the bottom right corner showed that after breaking up with Henry, I didn't leave South City but instead rented a small room and stayed for a few more months. Henry stared at those photos for a long time without saying a word, his brows furrowed tightly. After a long silence, he finally moved, carefully gathering each photo one by one, placing them in a drawer beneath the desk, and locking it. "Drive me to this hospital." He leaned on the table as he stood up, speaking softly to his assistant. "Can we not dwell on the past? Henry, why do you insist on going to the hospital? I really hate the smell of disinfectant." Sitting in the back seat of the car with Henry, I started chattering away again. He tilted his head back, closing his eyes. When they arrived at the hospital, the assistant parked the car and turned to remind Henry, "Boss, we're here." Henry gave a faint, then abruptly pushed the car door open and strode into the hospital. I have to say, this assistant is truly reliable, working diligently through the night. They not only found out which hospital I went to but also compiled a detailed list including my registration records, the department I visited, and the doctor I saw. What is this? This is the all-around versatile talent our era demands. For the 8th time today, I whispered into Assistant Jack's ear, urging him to demand a raise from Henry or else go on strike. Too bad Jack can't hear me. I followed Henry to the hospital registration desk, where I heard that familiar name from his lips again. Hematology, Zoe. The nurse looking at her phone lifted her eyelids, sizing Henry up from head to toe before speaking in a flippant tone. "Do you have an appointment?" Dr. Zoe is a very busy man. His schedule is fully booked every day. Yeah, don't hold up other patients. Henry, you should just leave." I poked his shoulder with my finger. Too bad I didn't actually make contact. My finger just passed right through him. Henry didn't say a word. He took out his phone and made a call. "Yes. This is Henry. I'd like to get in touch with Dr. Zoe at your hospital." "Yes, thank you." Within just a minute or two, the young nurse in front of him received a call on her phone. She glanced at the number and immediately stood up to answer it. "Director, what can I do for you?" The nurse's tone became respectful at once. "What? The dean called you?" Yes. There is someone here looking for Dr. Zoe. I'll bring him up right away." She glanced at Henry and lowered her voice. "Yes. I won't play with my phone during work hours anymore." Poor little nurse. Her attitude did a complete 180-degree turn. "Mister, Henry, please come with me. She quickly ran ahead. Dr. Zoe is in the hematology department on the 4th floor. I'll take you up to see him. Look, how wonderful it is to have money. Poor Henry, when he was broke, he couldn't even afford medicine for a cold. Now that he's made it, the director of a top-tier hospital personally arranges doctors for him. Sigh. I suddenly thought gloomily, if I had been rich back then, would I have died so pitifully? I was just feeling sentimental. Henry quickly arrived at the hematology department on the 4th floor. The door was half open, and he gently pushed it inward. A low voice came from inside. Wait outside. Can't you knock? I covered my mouth and chuckled. Zoe, still the same temper as ever. Henry's about to hit a brick wall. After about 10 minutes, when Henry was probably getting impatient, Zoe spoke again. Come in, but when Henry actually pushed the door open, he only took 2 steps before freezing in place. His gaze was fixed intently on Zoe, and for a long while, he didn't say a word. I thought about it and probably understood why. At the time, the photo I photoshopped on the seafood website was from Zoe's social media feed. To be fair, this wasn't entirely my fault. Zoe treated me for almost the entire duration of my illness, sometimes, while he was reviewing the scans. I'd get bored and chat with him. I said I was just too poor and didn't really want to continue treatment. Zoe told me to stop saying things like that. He said as a doctor, hearing patients constantly talk about dying made it seem like his professional skills were lacking. Then I mentioned I was planning to break up with my boyfriend and wanted to take some intimate photos with a male model to provoke him. As I spoke, I logged on to the homepage of a certain fashion blogger on Weibo. The screen was filled with abs and long legs, making me drool. This world still has beautiful things in it. After all, damn. Zoe slammed my phone face down on the table again. He said, Miss Jessica, these images are protected by portrait rights. If you download and misuse them without permission, you could face legal consequences. If you were doing this secretly at home, I wouldn't say anything, but since you're in my office, I feel obliged to remind you, that's serious, even though I'm about to die. I, Jessica, want to leave this world with a clean conscience. Dr. Zoe sighed and said, why don't you just find a man your boyfriend doesn't know? Wouldn't that work? So in the end, I downloaded a photo from Zoe's social media, photoshopped a group photo to deceive Henry. I thought he hadn't seen it, didn't expect this guy to still remember what Zoe looked like. I rubbed my chin. Could it be that after I left, he secretly picked up my photoshopped picture from the floor and stuck it back together to study the looks of his love rival? At that moment, Zoe raised his head. He tapped the table with the pen in his hand and said coldly, Mr. Henry, come in. Henry seemed to snap out of it only then, pulling out the chair in front of the desk and sitting down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. In the end, it was Henry who broke the silence. Frowning slightly, he asked hesitantly, You're Jessica's doctor. What kind of question was that? I'm completely speechless because of Henry. Oh, otherwise you thought I was her. Zoe snorted. He put down the medical record in his hand. Don't worry, I'm not her boyfriend. Maybe it's just my imagination. But I always felt that. Henry let out a long sigh of relief after hearing those words. Jessica mentioned me to you, didn't she? It's not that. It's mainly because you've been too much of a handful after she left. What Zoe meant was probably the series of statements Henry made in the media after my death. During a magazine interview, the reporter suddenly brought up his personal life. If he didn't want to talk about such things, he could have easily brushed it off. But Henry just smiled. Those were tough times, he said. My ex was a gold digger who left me when I was at my poorest. I thought I'd never recover. But thankfully, I pulled through. By then, he had already become a legend in the industry by making his fortune so quickly. The next day, Henry's ex is blind became a minor trending topic. There are all sorts of opinions about my blindness. Some say I'm cold-hearted, others claim I'm shallow, even more exaggerated. Some say I latched onto a 60-year-old man's wealth and got myself a sugar daddy. Henry never cleared up these rumors for me. I think if I were alive and saw these tabloid gossip snippets, I'd get so angry I'd develop depression even if I wasn't sick. Seems like dying quietly has its benefits too. Henry probably understood the implication in Zoe's words. His fingers tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he asked, I came to ask you, Jessica, what illness did she have? Patient privacy, Zoe said without hesitation. I'm her boyfriend. Henry slammed the table, gritting his teeth and speaking in a low voice. Zoe rolled her eyes. Boyfriend, didn't she dump you? That mouth of Zoe's. I could never win an argument with him before, and it often made me hopping mad. He even said my temper was better than being lifeless. Never thought that even with Henry stepping in, we still couldn't gain the upper hand. I scratched my head. This atmosphere was just too awkward. Unexpectedly, after a while, Zoe threw a medical report onto the table and said coldly to Henry, "She's already passed away. You were the only person she trusted while she was alive. Don't overthink it. I just didn't want Jessica to die bearing a reputation she didn't deserve." Hereditary sickle cell anemia, more common in females, usually manifests before the age of 30. Seeing these familiar sentences again, I suddenly felt my breath catch. Though I'm truly heartless, those uncomfortable memories from before death once more flooded into my mind. Henry remained silent. Zoe didn't speak either. He walked to the office window and quietly looked outside. After a long while, he walked back impatiently and said irritably, "Are you done yet?" Henry pointed to a line on the medical report and asked, "What does this mean? What do they mean by, 'There's a certain cure rate if detected early'? I was sent to the hospital after fainting at the company. That was the first time I realized I had this hereditary disease. There was no other way. I was abandoned by my father when I was just a teenager. He left me at the school gate, and the last words he said to me still haunt me. 'What use are you? You won't live for more than a few years. You can't even take care of me in my old age.' I didn't understand what this phrase meant when I was a child. At that moment, it suddenly dawned on me. Turns out, I was born without the right to be loved. In my eyes, Zoe was particularly cold that day. Since you knew it was a hereditary disease, why didn't you come for a checkup when you were younger?" He tapped the desk with his pen, looking very much like a strict teacher at school. "Some children take medication, undergo surgery, and can live to a ripe old age just like normal people. But now it's too late for me." I silently lowered my head. After a while, he raised his face and said foolishly, "Is my luck really that bad? Although I appear carefree and indifferent in front of others, but when I lie alone in bed at night, I cry secretly for a long time. I think this world is really terrible, as if it has never loved me." Henry took off his coat and sat on the bed, holding me after returning from his studio. "We've been together since high school, both from poor families, and we've stayed poor together for several years. The investment got rejected again." Henry sighed. "When things don't go your way, it feels like everyone looks down on you." I suddenly asked Henry, "What would you do if I left you too?" Henry froze. After a long while, he finally grabbed my hand and said, "What do you mean? Do you also look down on me for being poor?" "The last moments of my life were spent with Freya." Freya said that after I left. Henry became all weird and superstitious. I say, "It's better to endure a short, sharp pain than a long, dull one." Freya sighed and pointed at me. "You," I sighed along with her. "Can you really blame it all on me? This world never taught me how to love someone properly in the first place." Henry had been looking gloomy ever since leaving the hospital. Jack kept stealing glances at Henry's expression while driving. Finally, he cautiously asked, "Boss, are we heading back to the villa?" He let out a soft, and leaned back in his chair, tilting his head upward. After returning to the villa, Henry shut himself in the study again. I chattered away behind him, nagging, "Can you stop holing up inside all the time? It's spring already, how about going out for a walk?" But Henry had always scoffed at outdoor activities. He sat in the boss's chair, opened the drawer, and took out a metal box. Inside the box were several old newspapers, all from those outlets that smeared me after I left Henry. Truth be told, as a dead person, none of this matters to me anymore. But Henry probably didn't think so. He silently flipped through the pages, his breathing gradually becoming heavy and labored. His fingers gripping the paper turned pale from the force. Suddenly, he crumpled all those tabloids into a ball and violently threw them to the ground. "Fuck you," he cursed fiercely, then covered his face with his hands. A tear fell through my fingers, splashing onto the table. "Is it true or false that a short pain is better than a long one?" I drifted unsteadily in front of Henry, desperately wanting to reach out and gently embrace him. But I couldn't. "Jessica, you lied to me." My hand reached halfway into the air, but upon hearing Henry's words, I awkwardly withdrew it. "Yeah, I lied to you." I rubbed my nose, speaking with a guilty conscience. "I thought you were abroad. I was just afraid you'd forget about me." He lowered his hands from his face. Only then did I see the unmistakable sadness etched across his face. How childish. I kept saying it over and over in front of the media, just hoping you'd see. I have money now. I'm not that poor boy anymore. "Jessica, if you regret it, you can come back to me." "Jessica, do you regret it?" I really wanted to stand in front of you and ask that question to your face, but now, looking back, the only complete fool from head to toe was me, Henry. After being with you for so long, how could I not have known what kind of person you are? That night, Henry seemed drunk. Muttering to himself for a long time. I was originally still talking to him. Later, I couldn't keep up, so I just silently watched him. Eventually, even I, a ghost, couldn't stay awake and dozed off for a while. At the break of dawn, I was awakened by a violent knocking at the door. Henry, come out, get out here. That voice sounds somewhat familiar. I thought groggily. Miss Fong, this is Mr. Henry's private villa. You can't come in, Miss Fong. I snapped awake instantly. Freya, my crazy best friend. The next moment, Freya pushed open the study door. Henry, I came here today specifically for you. She stood with her hands on her hips, while the anxious old butler stood behind her. Henry hadn't slept well for 2 consecutive nights, and his face showed obvious signs of fatigue. Dark circles lingered under his eyes, and a faint stubble shadowed the corners of his lips. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and wearily lifted his head. What's wrong? What's wrong? You're asking me what's wrong after the scandal you caused at the engagement party the day before yesterday. Freya grabbed Henry by the collar, her voice fierce. I was sleeping at home when I got your call and knew something was off. It wasn't until the next day that I saw the news online. She paused, gritting her teeth. Tell me, are you trying to push Jessica into the spotlight again so everyone can criticize her? Henry's gaze dimmed. No. He only uttered this one sentence in a low voice. No further arguments or explanations, but Henry probably forgot. Freya has quite the temper. If you don't give her a satisfactory explanation, she can make a scene for a long time. Oomph. Freya let go of her hand and slowly stepped back. This was the prelude to her temper explosion. I just don't understand. What did Jessica ever do to wrong you? Yes, she didn't part with you on good terms. She hurt your pride, but she's been dead for so long. Can't you please remember the good in her? Remember that drawing? Jessica only had $100,000 left at the time, and she gave it all to you to settle this matter. Damn, I'm left with just these scraps of underwear, and Freya stripped them all off me. Henry's face instantly darkened. He even looked somewhat violent. Tom, he clenched his fist, his knuckles cracking audibly. What do you mean? Although Freya had a fiery temper, she was clearly at a disadvantage in the face of Henry at this moment. Freya mumbled. I don't want to talk about it anymore. There's no point bringing it up now. From what I knew of her, she was already starting to regret speaking without thinking. Henry grabbed Freya's arm. Come with me. Henry took Freya to the parking lot. He had Freya sit in the back seat. This time, he didn't call for a driver and drove himself. As soon as they got in the car, he started calling his assistant. Handle the Benson family matter for me. When mentioning the Benson family with whom the marriage alliance was proposed, his tone showed no emotional fluctuation. The cooperation will continue, and we can take over their real estate projects with broken capital chains, but the marriage alliance is over. Boss, are you sure about this? The assistant's voice came from the other end of the phone. This will definitely have a very negative impact on your public image. It doesn't matter. Henry's voice was cold. After a pause, he added, later, I need to draft a statement. Come to me tonight to pick it up. Who would have thought things would turn out like this? Freya was initially intimidated by Henry's aura and stayed quiet as a mouse for a while, but within 10 minutes, she snapped out of it and started slapping the back of Henry's seat. Henry, where are you taking me? I'll see you for human trafficking, she roared. Now that you're rich, you just want to silence anyone who gets in your way, don't you? I'm really dying of laughter at Freya's imagination. Henry does have patience, though, until the final break. Stopping in front of a concrete construction site, he leisurely rolls down the window, lights a cigarette, and extends it outside. The smoke curled upward, blending with the dust stirred by the rumbling excavator in the distance. Tell me, what's the deal with Tom? Henry flicked the ash off his cigarette and finally spoke. I never thought I'd hear Tom's name again after all this time. In the final stage of my life, I had seen him. At that time, I still had over $100,000 in my bank account. It was money I had painstakingly saved bit by bit, working part-time since high school, but this money was far from enough for medical treatment. The medications used for treatment were all imported, and $100,000 was spent in just a few treatment courses. The cost of surgery is higher. Zoe was the first to know about my situation. Although he was strict and sharp-tongued, his heart was surprisingly kind. If you really don't have the money, I can lend it to you, and you can pay me back later. When he said this, he still wore that aloof expression that kept people at a distance. But in the end, I didn't borrow from Zoe, because I knew I couldn't pay it back. If he gave it to me, it would be wasted sooner or later. I didn't want to die still owing a huge debt of gratitude, so what to do with that 100,000 became a problem. I pondered this major life issue as I left the hospital, only to run into Tom at the apartment building's entrance. He saw me too and flashed a somewhat disdainful expression. I knew it. He was here to cause trouble for Henry again. When Henry lacked startup capital, he was introduced to borrow a sum of money. Little did he know it was a trap. With its usurious nature and compounding interest, the debt ballooned to hundreds of thousands. Even if he wanted to sue, it would be extremely difficult. The evidence is scarce, and he has underworld connections. When you're poor, even $5 can be a matter of life and death, let alone hundreds of thousands. Back then, Henry often couldn't sleep for several nights in a row. I looked at Fong too, and he looked back at me. Suddenly, he grinned at me. What are you staring at? What, got the guts to pay back the money now? I responded with a, But I only have a little over 100,000. We can't cover the shortfall. Either you back off now, or we'll go down together. Maybe the expression on my face when I spoke gave him the impression that this person might not care about living anymore, which momentarily stunned Fong too. It took him a long moment before he remembered to raise his fist at me, but I just stood there motionless, coldly threatening him. This money of yours isn't clean either. If you really want to die, let's all die together, then I wouldn't be at a loss at all. I could drag one more person down with me before dying. You filthy bitch, he cursed. Tom's eyes were bloodshot, but in the end, he still took my $100,000. He never came to cause trouble again after that, hearing Tom's name from Henry again. I even felt a momentary daze. Was I too love-struck back then? I touched my head and pondered. Probably not. If I die with 100,000 left in my account, dying with money unspent, that's what you call bad luck. My approach is clearly the right philosophy of life. Freya glanced around and asked, if you want to know about Fong too, why come to a place like this? Would he even be here? Henry gave a, and pointed at a foreman wearing a hard hat, hauling bricks at the construction site in the distance. Isn't that him? Are you kidding me? Freya's voice carried a hint of disbelief. You did this? Henry let out a cold laugh. He deserved it. Indeed, he was vindictive to the core, never allowing anyone to take even the slightest advantage of him. Freya sighed, gazing at the construction site in the distance, and murmured, you must have guessed by now. The reason Fong Tu didn't cause any more trouble back then was because Jessica used the last $100,000 left in her account to fill the hole for you, her illness. After a long pause, Henry managed to utter these 3 words. His voice sounded so strained it hardly seemed like his own. She's long since stopped wanting to fuss over it, Freya said. After she spoke, both of them fell silent. The car just sat quietly by the roadside. After a while, the construction site began hauling gravel over this way. A line of workers passed by, with Tom at the end, also pulling a cart of cement. Though nominally a contractor, the work was far from easy. 2 years apart, he seemed to have aged 10 years. His face was weathered, covered in wrinkles. As he passed Henry's car, he paused for a moment, tilted his head to glance inside at the driver's seat, then suddenly leaned forward and grabbed the car window. Boss Henry, he called out, his tone humble and respectful. Are you passing by here? Henry shook his head. The remaining bit of cigarette butt in his hand fell onto Tom's hand, burning him and making him yelp. Ouch. But he didn't dare show any sign of displeasure, merely rubbing his hand discreetly. I came here specifically, Henry said coldly. Thinking about the past made me unhappy. This sentence frightened Tom. Then, what do you want me to do? Can I apologize to you? Tom said, trembling. Seeing Henry remain silent, he raised his hand and began slapping his own face frantically. I was young and foolish, and I offended you many times. My words were harsh. Please don't take them to heart. I stood behind Henry, watching Tom's face gradually turn red and swollen. This feeling is very strange. It's as if he's apologizing to me. Finally, Henry waved his hand, signaling Tom to stop. Do you know who you owe the most? He looked at Tom's trembling face and said word by word. Go home tonight and burn some money for Jessica. Understand? Who would have thought that after my death, the first person to burn paper offerings for me would be the small-time hoodlum Tom? Fate is truly bizarre and unpredictable. Henry took Freya to the entrance of her apartment building. I grumbled discontentedly at her retreating figure. Look at this. Even as a ghost I'm this poor. You, as my best friend, bear most of the responsibility for never sending me a single gold ingot. After missing 2 or 3 days at the company, a pile of miscellaneous tasks awaited Henry, the CEO, to handle. Even after returning, he didn't rest and immediately started bombarding his poor assistant with a long list of tasks, contracts, meetings, development. It made me so dizzy that I simply retreated to a corner to doze off. When I groggily opened my eyes, the assistant had already left, leaving only Henry behind again. He sat quietly at his desk, holding a thick financial report in his hands. It's already very late. I suddenly realized that being wealthy is actually quite exhausting. If it were before, I would have snatched the work from his hands long ago and forced him to sleep. But this guy seems a bit lonely, with no one to look after him. I stealthily floated behind him, observing the document he was currently reading. After watching for a long time, I noticed he hadn't turned a page in ages. He just sat there dazed, lost in thought. A gust of wind blew, making the curtains flutter gently. Outside, some beginner was practicing violin, the intermittent sawing sounds drifting into Henry's study with the breeze. He seemed to snap back to reality, suddenly pulling out his phone and opening a social media app. The trending list displayed the latest hot topics. Henry's name was prominently featured. Henry and Becky call off their engagement. Business cooperation with the Benson family will proceed as usual. Personal matters will not affect company operations. Henry's reputation is quite significant. The engagement has caused such a stir for so many days, I thought to myself, but when I saw the following report, I was stunned. Henry issues statement regarding ex-girlfriend. This was actually the statement that Henry had his assistant Jack release. It's not long, but it's packed with information. It clarified all the previous tabloid rumors and baseless attacks. On this page of text, I am portrayed as a bright, passionate girl who held kindness for everyone but was toyed with by fate. Only I have wronged her. She has never wronged me. Henry wrote these words, I still love you, Miss Jessica. The next day, Henry's life and work returned to normal. He started going back to the office again, tirelessly handling countless external business matters and subordinate requests. That relentless work ethic even made Jack, who was also a workaholic, unable to stand by and watch. When he brought documents for Henry to sign, he subtly advised, Boss, maybe you should take a few days off and rest. I suspect that Henry might only have his assistant as a decent friend by his side. Henry shook his head, continued signing, and instructed, the afternoon meeting will proceed as scheduled. Go prepare the meeting report. Jack sighed and had no choice but to leave. But Henry wasn't made of iron. After pulling so many all-nighters and barely eating, diving straight into these matters again, who could possibly endure that? So after the afternoon meeting, the moment he stepped out of the conference room, he staggered a couple of steps and collapsed to the ground. The executives immediately erupted into a flurry of panic. Someone pulled out their phone to call emergency services. Someone else pinched his philtrum and the webbing between thumb and index finger, while a few others held onto his legs and waist. Jack was pushed to the outside, stomping his feet and shouting, Stop shoving each other around and lay the boss flat first. Okay. Soon, the ambulance arrived and took him to the nearest top-tier hospital. This scene reminded me of the day I was diagnosed. When I fainted at the company, I crouched beside Henry, patted his head, and whispered, You should be okay, right? The wealthy and influential Henry, being a VIP client, was immediately attended to by a doctor. The doctor glanced at him and administered glucose through an injection in his arm. That injection jolted Henry awake. Hypoglycemia, overexertion. The doctor took out a pen and wrote on the medical record, No matter how much work you have, you shouldn't push yourself like this. Money can't be earned all at once. You're still young. Take care of your health. False alarm. Since it seemed like nothing serious, I wandered around the hospital corridor. This place has witnessed too many partings in life and death. The middle-aged man weeping on the bench, the doctors and nurses who just rushed past pushing a stretcher. It all inevitably brings to mind many unpleasant thoughts. My gaze followed those few people just now as they entered the emergency room. Suddenly, I spotted a familiar figure. The one standing at the door, scribbling randomly in a black notebook. Wasn't that the underworld bailiff, the Grim Reaper White? He told me he'd wait a while longer in the human world, but ended up waiting over 2 years. I stormed over and slapped the guy on the back. He staggered, turned around, rubbed his head, and took a long moment to recognize who I was. He let out an "I-O" and said, You, what was it that took you out?" I stared at him coldly. The underworld just had a bed open up. He stubbornly refused to admit that he had actually forgotten about me, pretending to flip through his book of life and death. "Today's a good day, I'll take you away," I responded with a, hold on a second. I floated back into Henry's hospital room. He must have been truly exhausted, closing his eyes and falling asleep again. I couldn't tell what he was dreaming about, but his brows were furrowed. Probably not a good dream. "I need to say goodbye to him," I said to the Reaper White, who had followed me. "You humans are always so troublesome." Old White clicked his tongue twice. "He can't hear you anyway." Broad daylight. Are you trying to haunt him or something? Though his words were harsh, since he'd already delayed me for so long, the Reaper White eventually came up with a solution for me. I entered Henry's dream. In this brief dream, I returned to the day I broke up with Henry. I held on to that photoshopped picture, then stuffed it back into my pocket without taking it out. The words of breaking up were swallowed back into my stomach. "Henry," I hugged him. "Hey. I might not be able to walk with you for a lifetime." He suddenly raised his head. "Jessica, what do you mean?" "I'm sick. A genetic disease. You know, I might not have much time left." He stared at me for a long time, then grabbed my wrist, trying to pull me away. "If you're sick, then go get treated," I thought. "I just came to say goodbye to you." I shook my head, finally tracing his brows and eyes with my fingers, saying softly, "It's too late. Henry, if you miss me in the future, you can always go look at the few rose bushes downstairs in the apartment. I planted them myself." The dream came to an abrupt end at that moment. I don't know if this counts as giving an ending to that other timeline from that year. Death. White tugged at my sleeve. "Let's go." I took one last look at Henry. Tears welled up in the corners of his eyes, slipping down his cheeks as he slept. "Jessica," he murmured. "Goodbye, Henry." Extra chapter. Since my soul had lingered in the mortal world for quite some time, the underworld officials hadn't yet arranged a reincarnation destination for me. The Grim Reaper White discussed with me, asking if I could stay in the underworld for a while, promising to send me to a wealthy family when the time came. After all, this was their territory, and I didn't want to cause a scene, so I agreed to stay temporarily. I never expected the underworld officials to live such comfortable lives, working just a little each day and spending the rest of their time eating, drinking, and having fun. Occasionally, they even place bets on news from the mortal world. "Hurry up and place your bets. How much are you putting in?" I recognized the voices immediately. These guys were at it again. A strangely shaped bailiff called out to me, "Miss, come place a bet too." Feeling rather bored, I walked over and casually asked, "What's the wager this time?" "Betting on who the Black Reaper White will bring back next." More boring than I imagined. I waved my hand, showing little interest. Seeing that I didn't want to participate, the others immediately became displeased. "You're the wealthiest person in the entire underworld. You know, don't be so stingy. Just throw down some pocket money." As for why I made it onto the underworld's Forbes rich list, it's a completely baffling matter. After I left with the Grim Reaper White, I occasionally checked in on what was happening in the mortal world. From our perspective, time in the human realm passes quickly. Years go by in the blink of an eye. Henry's company continues to grow rapidly. Not only has he solidified his leading position in the original industry, but he has also ventured into philanthropy. He established a foundation called the Jessica Medical Research Fund, dedicated to disease research and hospital construction, providing financial support to many medical students who couldn't afford their education. Remarkably, it has successfully treated several patients who were previously diagnosed with terminal illnesses. Many patients rushed to Henry's company to thank him. As a result, I started receiving paper money from many strangers underground at regular intervals, becoming a wealthy woman who reaped the benefits without lifting a finger. I couldn't stand being pestered by the ox-head and horse-face guards anymore, so I pulled out a stack of underworld banknotes and slapped them onto the table with a smack. "Let me see." I flipped through the book of life and death while keeping an eye on the top 3 hospitals in the mortal world. Haven't thought it through yet. The Grim Reapers Black and White have returned. This time it's a celebrity who died. Grim Reaper Black announced loudly. The newspapers are full of reports, rustling with news, and there are even people lining the streets to see him off. Henry. I was taken aback. My fingers stiffened. The underworld officers who had just been egging me on to place bets fell silent, all turning their gazes toward me. It wasn't really a surprise. Henry was already nearly 70 years old in the human world. The Grim Reaper, White, walked up to me and patted my shoulder. "Hey, Jessica," he said. "We've already picked out a family for your rebirth. You should go now." I was in a daze, as if I didn't quite understand. He gave me a push forward. Go on, hurry up. The underworld doesn't keep idle souls. I've arranged everything for you. You and your childhood sweetheart are still together. You're free from illness and financial worries. Your parents are loving, and Henry comes from a wealthy family. No need for any rags to riches struggles. All right, it finally dawned on me, and I jumped 3 feet high. Really, you're not lying to me. Feel free to come back and beat me up if I am, Death White said with absolute confidence. I rushed out in an instant, shouting as I ran, Henry, wait for me a second. After hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you.